Hello and welcome to Louise Singleton Creations. In today's video I will be testing out an idea I had to use a plastic milk bottle as a mould for epoxy resin. Inside my mould I'm going to try making a resin hologram, but the main thing for today is the milk bottle mould. Will it work? Won't it work? Let's have a look. So as you already know, I wanted to have a go at making a hologram in the same way I saw Jedrek do in one of his videos a couple of years ago. It really impressed me and I wanted to try it. And this is the ornament that I had in my house that I wanted to use. So my very first job in today's video was to make a mould of this ornament, but I couldn't do it in the usual way using liquid silicone. And the reason for that is, as I'm showing you here, it's got gaps going right through it. And if I poured liquid silicone for my mould, it would go through that gap and then I wouldn't be able to get the original ornament out of the silicone. It would be trapped because of that gap going through the back of the flowers. So I needed to think of another way, and luckily enough I had some silicone putty from Let's Resin. And here it is in its jars, part A and part B. This needs to be measured by weight and it's a 1-to-1 ratio. So I scooped out a handful of part B. It doesn't matter which one you do first, just as long as they both weigh the same. So it was part B for me. I scooped out the handful and weighed it and then made sure I weighed exactly the same amount of part A. And then once they were both weighed out, it was time to mix them together. And to do that, you just need to use your hands to combine them, give them a good squeeze around, a twist, a roll, whatever you want to do, until the white and the blue are completely combined and you can't see any streaks of white in there. Once my putty was ready, I started applying it a little bit at a time onto the ornament. And as you can see here, I'm pressing it into the flowers so that it really gets the detail of the flowers. But I'm being very careful not to press it into that space that goes behind the flowers. That way, my resin will be all in one piece when I pour it into my mould, and I will be able to take it out easily. Once that was done, I continued applying the putty until it was all completely covered. I left it for around an hour and then it was time to take the original ornament out of the mould. And for that I needed to cut a seam along the back of the mould. It's not flexible like if I'd used liquid silicone, and this is more designed for smaller items, not this kind of thing, but it did work for the purpose I was using it for, and I wasn't too worried about it having a little bit of a seam at the back. So that's why I didn't mind cutting it. I always knew I would need to. And I'm just doing it very gently. I didn't want to damage the ornament, so I'm just cutting very gently, a little bit at a time, teasing it apart and cutting it a little bit more. I really took my time with it, and yeah, it was fine in the end. So after a little bit of careful dissection, I was able to get my original ornament out of the mould and get my mould ready for some resin. Now obviously my mould had a big long cut along the back and I didn't want my resin to be leaking through, so I wrapped it up with some masking tape and then I wrapped some cling film around it just to be double sure, and then once the cling film was over it I wrapped it with more masking tape to make sure it was all nice and tight. I like to make sure I'm safe. Right, next, before pouring the resin into my new mould, I wanted to get my outer mould ready, and as you already know, I'm using a milk bottle for that. You know, when I got this plastic milk bottle and I took the label off, and saw that there wasn't a seam on the side of the bottle, I was so happy, because I have found when I've been wanting to try this idea out in the past that I can't find a plastic bottle that doesn't have a seam on it. And the other good thing about this bottle is it's a nice strong plastic, it's not flimsy, so I was hopeful that it would really keep its shape well. I could have used my knife to cut all the way around, but I do find you get better control with some small scissors. I don't know why, I just find it easier. So I use those tiny little scissors and get a much neater, more accurate line that way. So this bottle had been made with indentations in it to show where the label needs to go, I presume. That's what they're for anyway. So for the bottom of the bottle, I just needed to follow the indentation that was already there. But with the top of it, I'm ignoring the indentation that's there. That's where my resin will pour up to before it starts to curve and change shape. The reason I'm leaving excess is so that it's easier for me to take the plastic off when my piece is finished. And also I thought it would help it to keep its shape if I kept the bit where it starts to curve inwards. I was just hoping that would just keep its shape, and it seemed to do the job really well actually. So once my plastic barrier was cut and ready, I was able to put my ornament inside it to gauge how tall I actually needed my finished resin ornament to be. And there I measured how much I wanted to miss off at the bottom of my mould. And yeah, that's why I needed to do that first, so I knew how much resin to pour in. And then I marked the inside of my mould so I could see where to stop. However, with hindsight, I should have poured in even less resin. I seemed to somehow get my measurements wrong, but never mind. You'll see how I rectified the problem. Okay, now it's time for the resin. I needed to measure out equal parts by volume of part A and part B of Let's Resin's regular epoxy resin. I'm not using deep pour resin for this one. I will do for the next stage, but for the ornament I just used regular casting resin from Let's Resin. Once the resin was measured out, I used my automatic hands-free mixer from Let's Resin. I used it on high speed and I left it for a couple of minutes. And then once that was mixed, I put it into my bubble removal machine, also from Let's Resin, just to finish off the job nicely and make sure it was nice and bubble-free. Next, I put my mould into a cup to keep it upright and poured in my resin to the mark which I'd previously put on, hoping that it would be the right size. We'll see, shall we? Right, let's go back to my milk bottle plastic barrier. I was just going to seal the bottom of it with UV resin, but as it happened, after pouring my ornament, I had some epoxy resin left, so I thought I might as well use that. I've got a silicone mat there, and I just poured a puddle of the epoxy resin onto the mat, spread it around a little bit to make sure it was a big enough puddle, and then placed my bottle onto the puddle, making sure that the epoxy resin went right up to the edges to form a proper seal. If you decide to have a go at making a mould with a plastic bottle, don't be tempted to use hot melt glue to seal the bottle to your surface, because the hot melt glue will be too hot for it and it will distort the plastic. Right, the next day it was time to take my resin figure out of the mould, and so here I am just snipping away at my casing that I made, which worked well. There was no leakages, and yeah, it came out of the mould easily, no problems. There was a seam on the back, obviously as you would expect, because there was a seam on the mould, but I could use my craft knife just to carefully slice away the seam that was created, and I gave it a little bit of sanding too to smooth it down a bit. And unfortunately, as you might have guessed, it turned out to be too tall, so I did need to chop some off the bottom with my hacksaw, but never mind, eh? Right, once it was the right size, it was time to put it into my milk bottle mould, but I needed it to be able to stay still when I added my epoxy resin. So I used some UV resin from Let's Resin on the bottom of my figure, put it into the mould and then put it onto my UV lamp. I love my advanced UV lamp from Let's Resin because it comes in two parts and you can use the bottom part if you need to cure your item from underneath. After 2 minutes, when the UV resin was cured and the figure was completely secure, I added some more UV resin over the top of the figure. I didn't want it clinging to the side of my plastic bottle mould, so I poured it onto the head of the figure and let it roll down and find its own way down to the base. I wanted about 1 millimetre or so at the bottom of the mould. Next, it was time to add my dried flowers. I'm using some gypsophilia, which I got in a bouquet, and I've had it hung upside down in the corner of my craft room for a couple of months now, I think. So I didn't use silica sand or anything for these. With small flowers, you can often get away with just hanging them upside down, and yeah, they were fine, nice and dry. Now, I don't know exactly what to call the tool that I used to insert them into place. I've got long fingers, but my fingers weren't quite long enough to do it accurately with my fingers. There's more UV resin in there, as you know, and so before curing the resin, I wanted to add my flowers, and this tool really helped quite a lot. I bought it when I was making a lot of rag dolls, and it's for turning things inside out, and it's got really long, it's long. I don't know. Anyway, they were really good. Scissor clamps, something like that, I reckon they must be called. But yeah, I'm using them to apply my flowers. And I was a little bit worried, I've got to say. I kept them really small at the front of the figure, but I didn't know if it would interfere with the hologram effect at all. I really didn't know. I was making it up as I went along. You only find out by trying sometimes, don't you? Right, once all the flowers were in place, I cured the UV resin under the lamp again for 2 minutes, and then the flowers were secure. I mixed up my deep pour resin from Let's Resin and I poured it on over the head of the figure again and let any pockets of air that were trapped in the flowers escape. So I did do it quite slowly, even though you can see it sped up. Now, there was one problem which I hadn't thought about until it happened, and that was under the flowers on the figure that I moulded and made, there was places for pockets of air to get trapped that I couldn't get to get the air out of it, so you can probably see it there. 3 or 4 air bubbles just stuck in midair. There was not a lot I could do about that. Unfortunately, it's just one of those things. But I think it's quite magical to see it filling with resin and to see the figure disappearing. And you just get kind of a ghostly outline, don't you? Okay, it's time to see how well that plastic bottle barrier came off after the resin was cured. So this is 2 days later. I like to leave deep pour resin 2 or even 3 days before doing anything with it. So here you can see that the resin that I put in right at the beginning to seal the bottom, which seeped underneath, just comes off really easily. I really expected to have a tougher time getting that off, but it just snapped off. I could have probably done it with my fingers. So yeah, that was nice and easy. So that was a success. Let's see how easily the plastic comes off. Now, as I mentioned before, I left excess plastic at the top so that I was able to snip it and get started with pulling it away from the resin. I've got my heat gun there because I had a feeling I might need it to kind of melt the plastic bottle and make it distort to help to get it off. But as it happened, I didn't need it. Look how easily the plastic comes off. So I know people are going to ask, so if I don't mention this, there was no release agent inside that plastic bottle. It was just a plastic milk bottle which I rinsed out and allowed to dry. I didn't add anything to it to stop the resin from sticking, and it came off as easily as you've just seen. So yeah, and look how shiny the resin is. Really, really good. You can still see the figure in there. I was a bit concerned that the whole hologram thing wasn't really going to work very well, but I wasn't too worried because the main thing I was wanting to test out today and to show you was the milk bottle idea. And yeah, I think it's an amazing success. I am definitely going to be saving all my plastic milk bottles from now on. So here it is with a light underneath it. And yeah, I wasn't as blown away as I hoped I would be. Yeah, it's not as good as the one Jedrek did, that's for sure. But it was something I'd been wanting to have a go at, and I'm glad I did. It's still quite nice. Yeah, maybe without the flowers it would have worked better. But I just wanted it to look interesting when the light wasn't on. I didn't want it to just be a block of clear resin. That's why I put the flowers in. But yeah, it's okay. And what I did try doing was taking a piece of dark cardboard and cutting a small hole in it so that I could have the light just going underneath the body of the figure to see if that would make a difference. But I'm not really sure that I could see any difference. What do you think? Yeah, I'm really not sure. Anyway, I'm glad I had a go. But anyway, the main thing is the milk bottle. That's what this was all about, really. The milk bottle worked so well. And I'm definitely going to be using it as a mould from now on because I've been looking for a cylinder mould this size for ages and never found one. And now I don't need one. I can use my plastic milk bottle. And yeah, very good. I can do all sorts in there as well. Can you think of some ideas yourself maybe? Maybe I've inspired you to have a go. Maybe some bigger flowers in there or a scene like you would do in a pyramid mould. You could do all sorts, couldn't you? So yeah, watch this space for more things coming soon. So we've come to the end of another video. I hope I've inspired you. Please give me a thumbs up if you've enjoyed the video and subscribe if you would like to. And I will see you again next time. Thank you for watching and bye for now.